My name is Lorraine Hayes. I am 66 years old, retired, and until one violent afternoon in Illinois, I believed I already understood loss. I was wrong. 8 years earlier, my husband, Thomas, collapsed at our kitchen table while reading the paper. One moment he was complaining about the weather, the next, he was gone. I survived that grief the way many widows do, quietly. I learned how silence fills rooms once meant for two. I learned how evenings stretch long when no one asks how your day was. I thought that was the hardest thing life could take from me. I didn't know what it meant to lose everything at once. That Tuesday began like any other. At exactly 3 o'clock, I poured hot water over a tea bag and set the cup beside the window, watching the familiar street I'd lived on for over 40 years. The air felt heavy, thick in a way that made my skin prickle. The radio murmured something about unstable weather, but in Illinois, storms are part of life. You listen, you wait, you don't panic. At 3:15, the sirens screamed, not a warning, a command. The sound sliced through the air, long and terrible, rattling my chest as if the world itself were breaking open. The radio announcer's voice cracked with urgency. Tornado on the ground, moving fast, take shelter immediately. I didn't think, I reacted. I grabbed a small suitcase and stuffed it with whatever my hands landed on. Our wedding album, Thomas's old wristwatch, my mother's hand-sewn quilt, and a folder of insurance papers. 40 years of living reduced to what I could carry down the stairs. The basement door slammed shut behind me just as the house began to groan. The noise above was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Wood twisted, glass shattered. The roar swallowed everything like a freight train tearing straight through my living room. The ground trembled so violently I pressed myself into the corner, clutching Thomas's old wool sweater and praying the walls would hold. And then, nothing. No relief, no calm, just a hollow stillness that felt worse than the storm. When I pushed the basement door open, the house I had built my life in was gone. The roof had vanished. The kitchen table was nowhere to be seen. Above me, the sky was bruised and open, boards scattered like broken bones. My rose garden, the one I had tended for 2 decades, was shredded into dirt and stems. I stood there, shaking, sweater still pressed to my chest, and cried for the first time since Thomas's funeral. Neighbors called my name, stumbling through debris, their faces pale with shock. Red Cross workers spoke of shelters and cots in school gymnasiums. I nodded, but inside I felt empty. I didn't want a crowd. I didn't want strangers. I wanted my son. I borrowed a phone and dialed Michael's number, my hands trembling as I pressed it to my ear. "Michael?" I whispered when he answered. "It's Mom. My house. It's gone." There was a pause. Then he said he'd call me back. The next morning, I loaded what little I had into my old sedan, 1 suitcase and 3 trash bags, and drove north toward Chicago. The sky was bright, almost cruel in its normalcy. Mud and damp plaster filled the car with the smell of ruin. I told myself this was temporary, just until insurance came through, just until I could stand on my feet again. Michael lived in one of those glass towers near downtown, sleek, modern, untouchable. The doorman looked at my car, at the trash bags, and handed me a visitor badge as if I were a stranger. Michael opened the door before I knocked. For one hopeful second, my heart lifted. Then I saw the distance in his eyes. His apartment was pristine, white furniture, polished floors, art that looked expensive but cold. His wife, Tessa, appeared behind him, perfectly styled, her smile polite but empty. I sat on the edge of their sofa, afraid to leave a mark. "It's just temporary," I said quickly, "until things settle. I can help around the house. I won't be in the way." Michael didn't sit beside me. He folded his hands like he was about to negotiate. "Mom," he said carefully, "we value our privacy here." The words struck harder than the storm had. Tessa leaned forward, her tone gentle but firm. "There are very nice extended stay places nearby. Clean, safe." "And how am I supposed to afford that?" I asked quietly. Michael said he could give me a few $100s. A few hundred. I stood, my dignity burning. "So that's it. I don't belong here." No one answered. That night, I slept in my car beneath the city streets, the sweater wrapped around my shoulders, telling myself it was only for one night. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. I thought losing my home was the worst thing that could happen, but the real storm didn't come from the sky. It came from realizing I no longer had a place in my own son's life. I woke up to the sound of a delivery truck braking hard somewhere nearby. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then the ache in my neck and the cramped angle of my legs reminded me. The front seat of my car, the faint smell of gasoline, the sweater still wrapped around my shoulders like a fragile shield. Chicago was already awake. People walked past my car without looking twice. Men in pressed coats, women talking into headsets, coffee cups in hand. I blended into the background, just another parked vehicle in a city that didn't pause for anyone. I checked my phone. No messages from Michael. I washed my face in a gas station restroom and tried to make myself presentable, smoothing my hair, straightening my jacket. I told myself I would go back to his apartment later, once emotions cooled, once he had time to think. I believed that because believing anything else hurt too much. By mid-morning, my insurance adjuster finally returned my call. His voice was sympathetic but distant, the kind trained to soften disappointment without changing it. "Given the extent of the damage," he said, "this process will take time, weeks, possibly months." Months. I thanked him and ended the call, my hand trembling as I lowered the phone. Months meant shelters, temporary housing, paperwork, and money I didn't have. I drove aimlessly until hunger forced me to stop. A small diner near the river caught my eye. Nothing fancy, just a place with fogged windows and the promise of warmth. I slid into a booth and ordered toast and coffee, counting the bills in my purse twice before handing them over. The waitress didn't rush me. That alone felt like kindness. As I ate, I watched families come and go, a mother scolding her child gently, an older couple sharing a newspaper, ordinary moments that felt suddenly unreachable. My phone buzzed. Michael. My heart leapt before I could stop it. "Mom," he said, his voice controlled, "I've been thinking." "So have I. I can come back tonight. I'll be quieter. I'll stay out of the way." There was a pause. "Tessa's parents are visiting this weekend. It's just not a good time." Not a good time. I stared at the scratched tabletop. "Michael, I don't have anywhere else." Another pause, longer this time. "There's a senior resource center near here," he said. "They can help you find options." Options. I thanked him because I didn't trust myself not to cry if I said anything else. When the call ended, I sat there until the coffee went cold. The resource center was housed in an old brick building with peeling paint and a flickering sign. Inside, a woman named Diane listened patiently as I explained everything: the tornado, the insurance delays, my son. She didn't look surprised. "You're not alone," she said softly. "More people end up here than you'd think." She handed me pamphlets, lists of shelters, and information about temporary programs. I accepted them gratefully, but each piece of paper felt like confirmation that my life had slid into a category I never expected to belong to. By late afternoon, the sky darkened again, rain threatening. Diane arranged for me to stay one night at a women's transitional shelter on the west side. It's safe, she assured me, not permanent, just somewhere to breathe. The shelter was clean but crowded. Rows of narrow beds, the low murmur of strangers telling pieces of their stories into the darkness. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of strangers breathing. This wasn't how my life was supposed to look at 66. The next morning, as I was gathering my things, Diane called me aside. She said, "There's a message for you. A man stopped by earlier, said he was looking for you." My stomach tightened. Did he leave a name? She nodded. Yes, Daniel. The name hit me like a sudden gust of wind. Daniel Harper. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in more than 40 years. He said, Diane continued, watching my reaction closely, that if I was ready to talk, he'd be at the corner cafe on Maple Street this afternoon. Maple Street. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my mind racing backward through decades. Daniel, the boy I loved before life pulled us in different directions. The man who wrote me one letter after Thomas and I married, wishing me happiness, and then disappearing completely. Why now? Why here? I told Diane thank you and left the shelter in a daze, the city blurring around me. I didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. Maybe both. At noon, I stood across the street from the cafe, watching through the window. A man sat alone at a corner table, silver hair at his temples, posture familiar despite the years. He looked up and our eyes met. Recognition passed between us instantly, quiet, undeniable. I took a breath and stepped inside. I thought losing my home had closed every door. I didn't yet know that one from my past was about to reopen, and with it, the truth about why some losses arrive only to make room for something unexpected. For a moment, I stood frozen just inside the cafe door. The smell of coffee and warm bread wrapped around me, grounding and familiar, yet my heart pounded as if I had stepped into another lifetime. Daniel rose slowly from his chair, hesitation written across his face. Not uncertainty, recognition, the kind that doesn't need confirmation. "Lorraine," he said softly. No one had said my name that way in years. "Daniel," I replied, my voice thinner than I expected. We sat across from each other, a small, round table between us, as if the decades had placed it there deliberately to give us something solid to hold on to while everything else shifted. He looked older, of course, so did I, but the way he watched me, carefully, respectfully, was the same, as if he were listening even when I wasn't speaking. "I heard about the tornado," he said. "I tried to reach you sooner." "How did you even find me?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Chicago is big, but it's also small when you ask the right questions." I wrapped my hands around the mug the waitress brought me, letting the heat seep into my fingers. "You came a long way." "I never went far," he replied, "just stayed quiet." We talked cautiously at first, safe topics, his work, my years with Thomas, the storm, the insurance delays. I didn't mention Michael right away. Some wounds need permission before they're named. Daniel listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, as if every word mattered. When I finally told him about sleeping in my car, about the shelter, his jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have been alone," he said. "I wasn't," I replied gently. "I just thought I was." There was a long pause after that. "I didn't come here to reopen old things," he said finally. "I came because I thought you might need someone you didn't have to explain yourself to." That was when the tears came, not dramatic, not loud, just quiet, unstoppable. Daniel slid a napkin across the table without comment, giving me space and time. When I could speak again, I asked the question that had been circling since Diane mentioned his name. "Why now?" I asked. He took a breath. "Because when I heard you lost your home, I realized how much of your life had been built on holding things together, and I wondered who was holding you." The truth of it sat heavy between us. Daniel didn't offer solutions. He didn't rush to fix anything. He simply asked where I was staying and whether I had somewhere safe to go that night. "I don't," I admitted. "Then you do now," he said simply. I hesitated. "Daniel, I can't." "I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently. "I have a spare room, that's all. No expectations." Something in his voice told me he meant it. By evening, I followed his car through streets I barely recognized to a modest townhouse on the north side. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, clean, quiet. He showed me the guest room, neatly made, sunlight still lingering on the quilt. "You can stay as long as you need," he said, "or as little." That night, I slept deeply for the first time since the storm. In the morning, Daniel made breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. Toast, eggs, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. We ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Then, my phone rang. Michael. I stared at the screen before answering. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were with someone?" "With someone?" I repeated. "Yes, Tessa saw you yesterday at the cafe, with a man." I closed my eyes. "I didn't know I needed permission," I said calmly. "This doesn't look good," he snapped. "People are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" I asked. "About your judgment, about whether you're stable." I felt something inside me harden, not into anger, but resolve. I survived a tornado, I lost my home, and I'm still standing. If that looks unstable to you, that's your problem. There was silence on the line. "We'll talk later," Michael said curtly, then hung up. Daniel had heard enough to understand. "They're worried," he said. "No," I replied, "they're threatened." That afternoon, I received an email from the insurance company requesting additional documentation, documents I knew were buried under rubble miles away. The pressure was building again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Daniel sat with me as I sorted through what I had left, helping me make calls, taking notes, asking questions I hadn't thought to ask. His calm steadiness filled the spaces where panic used to live. As evening settled, I stood at the window watching city lights flicker on. "I don't know what comes next," I said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Neither do I, but whatever it is, you won't face it the way you have been." Outside, the city moved on, cars passing, lives continuing, and for the first time since the storm, I felt something unexpected stir beneath the grief. Possibility. I thought finding Daniel again was a coincidence, a comfort offered by chance. I didn't yet understand that his return would force my son to reveal just how far he was willing to go to keep control. The first sign that Michael wasn't just worried, but planning, came 2 days later. I was sitting at Daniel's kitchen table, sorting through what little paperwork I'd managed to salvage, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. An email, marked urgent, from a legal firm I didn't recognize. Subject: Notice of concern regarding housing and capacity. My hands went cold. Daniel noticed immediately. "What is it?" I handed him the phone. He read silently, jaw tightening with each line. "They're requesting a formal assessment," he said carefully, "claiming concern about your living situation and decision-making ability." I didn't need to ask who they were. "So he's doing this now," I said quietly. Daniel nodded. "It's a common tactic. Frame it as care, file it as concern." The words from the cafe replayed in my head. People are asking questions. Michael hadn't been embarrassed, he'd been preparing. That afternoon, Michael called again. This time, I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice measured, almost rehearsed. "We need to talk seriously." "I'm listening," I replied. You can't just stay with someone you barely know, he said. It's not safe. It doesn't look stable. I've known Daniel longer than I've known your wife, I said calmly. That's not the point, he snapped. The point is perception. There it was again. Not my safety, my image. I've filed paperwork, he continued, just precautionary, a capacity review. If everything's fine, it'll be dismissed. And if it's not? I asked. Silence. You don't get to decide my future, I said quietly. I'm your son. Someone has to. The line went dead. Daniel exhaled slowly. We need to move carefully. Carefully how? I asked. By documenting everything, he said, and by making sure your voice is heard before anyone else speaks for you. The next few days passed in a blur of appointments. Daniel insisted I meet with an independent physician, someone with no ties to my son, no interest beyond the truth. The evaluation was thorough, respectful, and mercifully short. Your cognition is excellent, the doctor said. Given recent trauma, your emotional responses are normal. Normal. The word felt like an anchor. We also met with a legal aid attorney Daniel trusted. She explained my rights clearly, firmly, without sugarcoating the risks. Your son is attempting to establish control, she said, whether he realizes it or not. I think he realizes it, I replied. That night, I barely slept. Memories surfaced uninvited. Michael as a boy holding my hand crossing the street. Michael at 16 slamming doors. Michael as a grown man learning how to sound reasonable while taking what he wanted. The next morning, I received a message from Tessa. This doesn't have to get ugly. I didn't reply. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote. I sat at Daniel's desk and wrote everything. Dates, conversations, decisions. The storm, the refusal, the shelter, the cafe, the emails, the calls. Not to accuse, to record. Because stories only get rewritten when there's no record. That afternoon, Michael arrived unannounced. Daniel answered the door before I could. This is inappropriate, he said, his eyes darting past him into the house. I agree, Daniel replied calmly. You should have called. Michael stepped inside anyway. Mom, he said, lowering his voice, this isn't about punishment, it's about responsibility. I am responsible, I said, standing, for myself. You're being influenced, he insisted. This man, Daniel held up a hand. Say that again carefully. He scoffed. You think she's fine, sleeping in shelters, depending on strangers? I offered help, I said. You offered distance. The room fell silent. I didn't refuse you, he said. I set boundaries. So did I replied. His face hardened. If you don't cooperate, he said, the assessment will proceed without your input. I met his gaze steadily. Then it will fail. Daniel stepped forward. This conversation is over. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think you've won. No, I said softly. I think I've stopped losing. He left without another word. That evening, Daniel sat across from me as I folded laundry that wasn't even mine. Are you okay? He asked. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm clear. Clarity, I was learning, is heavier than denial, but far more stable. Later, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed again. An email. This one from the same law firm. Subject: assessment withdrawn. No explanation, no apology, just withdrawal. I stared at the screen, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. Michael hadn't backed down out of love. He'd backed down because he knew he couldn't win. And that knowledge changed something fundamental between us. I thought stopping the assessment would end the conflict. I didn't yet realize that when control fails quietly, resentment grows louder, and my son wasn't finished trying to reclaim it. Though withdrawal of the assessment didn't bring peace, it brought distance. Michael stopped calling altogether. No messages, no updates, no arguments, just silence, thick and deliberate, like a door closed softly but locked from the inside. I told myself it was temporary, that he needed time, that space might cool whatever had flared between us. Daniel didn't say much about it. He understood silence differently than I did. To him, silence wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was strategy. A week passed, then another. Insurance paperwork continued to crawl forward, slowed by inspections, estimates, and the reality that my house had been reduced to a number on a form. The payout wouldn't cover rebuilding, not even close. The land itself was intact, but the structure, the life built around it, was gone. One afternoon, Daniel and I drove past the property. The road was still littered with debris from other homes, blue tarps flapping like tired flags. When we reached my lot, I asked him to stop. I stepped out of the car slowly. The foundation remained, crooked but stubborn. Weeds already pushed through the cracks where my kitchen once stood. I could picture it clearly, the stove by the window, Thomas leaning against the counter, complaining about the draft. "I don't think I can rebuild," I said quietly. Daniel nodded. "That's not giving up." "I know, it's choosing." That night, I made the decision official. I listed the land for sale, not through Michael, not through anyone he knew, but through an independent agent recommended by the legal aid attorney. The price was fair, firm, and non-negotiable. When the listing went live, my phone rang within hours. "Michael." I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "You sold it," he said flatly, not a question. "I listed it," I corrected. "There's a difference." "You cut me out," he snapped. I closed my eyes. "It was never yours." He exhaled sharply. "You're making a mistake. Developers are circling. You could have waited." "Waited for what?" I asked. "Permission?" Silence. "You cut me out," he said. "No, I stepped out." "You chose him," Michael said bitterly, "over your own son." I felt the sting of it, but not the guilt. I chose myself, and I wish you could understand the difference. He hung up. The next few days were tense. Michael contacted the agent, questioning the listing, implying confusion, asking for delays. Each attempt was documented, each one declined. For the first time, boundaries held. Offers came in quickly, not outrageously high, just steady, serious. The agent handled everything professionally, shielding me from pressure. One evening, as Daniel and I sat down to dinner, he asked, "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said, for the first time in a long while. I didn't say it lightly. Selling the land wasn't erasing my past, it was releasing it. Thomas had loved that home, but he had also loved seeing me choose what was right for myself. I knew that in my bones. The final offer came on a rainy Thursday morning. I signed the papers with a steady hand. When the funds transferred, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief exactly, but completion. A chapter closed cleanly, without being torn out. That afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Michael. It wasn't long. No apology, no accusation, just this. "I don't recognize you anymore. I don't know where I fit." I read it twice, then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. That night, I stood on Daniel's porch, watching rain streak the streetlights. The city felt quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath. "Do you regret anything?" Daniel asked. I thought about the storm, the shelter, the car, the cafe, the assessments, the phone calls. "No," I said finally, "but I do grieve." "For what?" he asked. "For the version of motherhood that told me love meant enduring anything, even disappearance." Daniel nodded. "That's a hard thing to unlearn." "I'm learning," I said. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. The sale was complete. I wasn't homeless anymore. But more importantly, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I thought selling the land would end the tension. I didn't yet understand that letting go of my past would force the people in my present to reveal who they truly were and whether they could accept me without control. The money from the sale settled faster than I expected. Numbers appeared in my account, clean, final, impersonal. They didn't carry the weight of memory the way land did. They didn't smell like rain or echo with laughter. They simply were. And for the first time since the tornado, that simplicity felt like mercy. Daniel insisted we take a day before making any decisions. Big changes need quiet, he said, not momentum. So we drove north, away from the city, toward the lake. We sat on a bench overlooking gray water, gulls circling overhead, the wind sharp but honest. I wrapped my coat tighter and watched the horizon, realizing how rarely I had allowed myself to just look forward without calculating who might object. "What do you want now?" Daniel asked gently. The question startled me. Not what should you do, not what makes sense, not what will keep the peace. What do you want? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know what I don't want. He nodded, accepting that as a complete answer. Back in the city, I began the slow work of rebuilding, not a house, but a life. I met with a financial advisor recommended by the legal aid clinic, someone who spoke plainly and didn't assume I needed simplifying. Together, we planned conservatively, security first, flexibility second, legacy last. Legacy, I learned, didn't mean inheritance. It could mean example. I found a small apartment on a quiet street near a public garden. Nothing flashy, big windows, good light, close enough to walk everywhere. When I signed the lease, my hand shook, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of choosing without consulting anyone else. I moved in with fewer boxes than I thought I'd need. Letting go had become easier. Michael didn't come. He didn't call. Weeks passed without a word. At first, the silence hurt. Then it dulled. Then it taught me something I hadn't expected. Silence can be an answer. One afternoon, while unpacking books, I found an old photo tucked inside a novel. Thomas and me sitting on the porch steps, younger than I remembered, smiling into a future we believed would always include certainty. I sat on the floor and cried, not from pain, but from gratitude. I had loved deeply. I still did. That night, Daniel came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. We ate on the floor, laughing at nothing important, the kind of laughter that arrives only when tension has finally loosened its grip. "I should tell you something," he said after a while. I waited. "When I heard about the tornado," he continued, "I didn't just worry about you losing your house. I worried you'd lose your footing." I smiled faintly. "I did for a while." "But you found it again, on your own," he said. I looked at him. "You helped." "Yes, but you didn't disappear into me. That matters." It did matter. What we were building wasn't rescue. It was companionship, side by side, not over or under. A month later, I received another letter from Michael. This one was longer. He wrote about stress, about expectations, about feeling shut out, about how everything had changed too fast. He didn't apologize, but he also didn't accuse. I read it carefully, then set it aside. Some conversations require more honesty than the other person is ready to offer. I wasn't going to force one. Instead, I wrote back something simple. "I'm not gone. I'm just no longer where you left me." I didn't know how he would receive it, but I knew it was true. As autumn arrived, the garden near my apartment filled with color. I took morning walks, learned the names of neighbors, joined a small community reading group at the library. People knew me not as someone's mother or someone's widow, but as myself. That shift was subtle and profound. One evening, as Daniel and I walked home from dinner, he stopped under a streetlight. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the storm hadn't come?" he asked. I considered it. Yes, I said, and I think I would have stayed where I was, quietly shrinking. He nodded. Sometimes disruption is the only thing loud enough to wake us. As I unlocked my door that night, I felt a strange certainty settle in me. The worst was behind me, but the hardest part, the part where relationships either evolve or fracture, was still ahead. And the next choice wouldn't be about survival. It would be about forgiveness. I thought rebuilding my life would be the final chapter. I didn't yet realize the most difficult decisions still waiting for me had nothing to do with homes or storms, but with whether I could accept my son back without losing myself again. Michael reached out in early November. Not with a call, not even an email, a text. Can we talk? I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. The words were neutral, almost careful, no demands, no defensiveness. That alone told me something had shifted, or at least cracked. I didn't respond right away. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't arrive on command. It needs time to decide whether it's safe. That evening, Daniel noticed the quiet change in me. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said, reading my expression the way he always did, without pressing. "I know," I replied, "but avoiding it won't make it disappear." We agreed I would meet Michael somewhere public, neutral, no territory to claim, no power imbalance disguised as hospitality. 2 days later, I chose a small cafe near the river, the kind with mismatched chairs and windows that fog easily in the cold, a place that encouraged honesty by offering nothing impressive to hide behind. Michael arrived 10 minutes late. He looked tired, not unkempt, just worn in a way that suggested sleepless nights and rehearsed conversations. When he saw me, he hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from mine. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I'm here to listen, not to be convinced." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them. "I didn't handle things well," he said finally. I waited. "He thought I was helping," he continued. "I thought if I controlled the situation, I could keep everything from falling apart." "That's not help," I said quietly. "That's fear pretending to be authority." He winced, but didn't argue. "I didn't know how to see you struggle," he admitted. "You were always steady after Dad died, after everything. When the storm happened, it scared me." "It scared me too, but you didn't stand with me, you stood over me." He swallowed. "I know." There it was, not an apology, but acknowledgement. "That assessment," I continued, my voice calm but firm, "was a line you cannot cross again." "I won't," he said quickly. "I swear." I held his gaze. "If you ever try to speak for me instead of to me, I will walk away, permanently." He nodded. "I understand." We sat in silence again, the clink of cups and low murmur of other conversations filling the space between us. "Where does this leave us?" he asked finally. "It depends on whether you can accept me as an adult, not a problem to solve." He looked down at his coffee. "I'm trying." "Trying isn't enough," I said gently, "but it's a start." When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Are you happy?" he asked. The question surprised me. "Yes," I said honestly, "I am." He nodded, absorbing that. "I'm glad," he said, and for the first time, it didn't sound like obligation. We parted without hugs, without promises, just clarity. That night, I told Daniel everything. He listened quietly, then asked only one question. "How do you feel?" I said after a moment, lighter but cautious. "That sounds healthy," he replied. Winter settled in gently. Snow dusted the sidewalks. The garden near my apartment went quiet, resting. My life followed suit, not empty, but peaceful. Michael and I exchanged occasional messages after that. Nothing dramatic, updates, small check-ins, We were learning a new language with each other, one that didn't rely on guilt or authority. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as Daniel and I decorated a small tree in my apartment, he paused, ornament in hand. "You've changed," he said softly. "So have you," I replied. "Yes," he smiled, "but you've changed in a way that feels settled." I thought about that. I stopped negotiating my worth. That makes everything else clearer. Later that night, alone, I stood by the window watching snow fall under the streetlights. I thought about how close I had come to losing myself, not to the storm, not to homelessness, but to the quiet expectation that love requires surrender. It doesn't. Love requires presence, choice, respect. And now, finally, I had all three. But something else lingered too, a question I hadn't yet answered, whether rebuilding relationships meant reopening old doors, and whether some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. I thought speaking my truth would bring resolution. I didn't yet understand that the final test wouldn't be whether my son could respect my boundaries, but whether I could maintain them when forgiveness came knocking. Forgiveness didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, small, careful pieces that asked permission before settling. I noticed it in the way my shoulders no longer tensed when Michael's name appeared on my phone, in the way I could speak about the storm without feeling like I was standing in the wreckage again. Winter passed quietly. Snow melted into gray slush, then disappeared entirely, leaving the city damp and expectant. Spring followed, hesitant at first, then bold, buds pushing through branches as if nothing had ever been broken. My life began to mirror that rhythm. I planted herbs on the windowsill, learned which mornings the bakery down the street put out fresh bread, volunteered once a week at the library, shelving books and recommending stories to strangers who didn't know my past and didn't need to. I was building something new, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. Michael and I met again in early April. This time it was his suggestion, and he chose the place. A quiet park halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground again. He arrived on time. That mattered. We walked for a while before sitting on a bench overlooking the river. The water moved steadily, unconcerned with our history. "I've been in therapy," he said suddenly. I turned to look at him. He didn't say it for praise. He said it like a fact, something he was still learning how to hold. I realized I confuse responsibility with control and fear with love. I didn't respond right away. "That realization doesn't erase what happened," I said finally, "but it explains it." He nodded. "I'm not asking you to forget." "I won't," I replied, "but I might forgive." The words sat between us, not fragile, but unfinished. "I want to be part of your life, as your son, not your supervisor." I studied his face, looking for the old certainty, the confidence that told me he knew best. It wasn't there. What I saw instead was something less comfortable, but more honest: uncertainty. "That can work," I said, "if you understand one thing." "What's that?" "If you ever try to manage me again," I said calmly, "I will walk away and I won't come back." He didn't flinch. "He understands," he said. This time I believed him. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting with dinner and a knowing smile. "How did it go?" he asked. "Carefully," I replied, "which feels right." He nodded. "Careful is respectful." Weeks passed. Michael and I settled into a new rhythm: occasional dinners, honest conversations, no unspoken expectations. It wasn't the relationship we once had. It was better, because it was chosen. One evening, as Daniel and I sat on the balcony watching the sun sink behind the buildings, he reached for my hand. "He's been thinking," he said, "about us." I turned toward him, heart steady. "So have I," I replied. He said, "I don't want to rush anything, but I also don't want to pretend this is temporary." I smiled. "Neither do I." We didn't make declarations, we didn't outline plans, we simply agreed to keep choosing each other, day by day, without obligation. It felt solid, earned. Later that night, alone, I reflected on how easily my life could have gone differently. One storm, one refusal, one choice to disappear quietly for the sake of peace. That's how it happens, I realized, not through cruelty, but convenience, through the assumption that older women will step aside, that they will shrink gracefully, that they will trade autonomy for harmony. I didn't. And because I didn't, everything changed. I am not who I was before the tornado. That woman believed stability came from endurance, from staying put, from absorbing discomfort until it became familiar. This woman knows better. Stability comes from alignment, from living where your values don't have to negotiate for space, from understanding that love without respect is not love, it's leverage. Sometimes I still miss the old house, the creak of the stairs, the way the light fell across the kitchen floor in late afternoon. But I don't miss the version of myself who thought survival meant silence. I survived, and then I lived. I once believed the storm destroyed my life. Now I understand it revealed it, and the final chapter isn't about what I lost, but about what I finally refused to give up again.